Good evening, Danvers. I'm Mark Zubarek, and I'm the host of the Topics of the Town News. This is the June 23rd, 2022, and I have two special guests with me today, and it's Richard Trask and John Archer. And welcome to our local broadcast. It is intended to open exchange of ideas, providing a forum for our residents, commentators, and meant for Danvers residents. First, I'd like to give a brief tribute to Wayne Marquis, who we lost June 8th, I believe, and that was a great loss for the town of Danvers. The town manager at age 26, Wayne worked tirelessly for the people of Danvers for the next 3.5 decades. He was especially devoted to the children of the community, constantly advocating to their educational and recreational needs in financial matters. His leadership was acknowledged not only by the local taxpayers, but by municipal leaders throughout the state. In his management of Danvers Electric, he took the state's oldest municipal power company and made it one of the most preeminent, and we all share in that good fortune. During his tenure, nearly every town building was either built or rebuilt or significantly renovated for the benefits of the people of Danvers. A highlighting achievement was Wayne's role in garnering widespread support and collaboration for the building and restructuring of the Essex Agricultural School, which was during many years of meetings. The school and into known as an Essex Tech North Agricultural and Technical High School. He proudly served as the Danvers representative to the school committee, and there is a project that held a special place in his heart. And just to give you a little bit of background, I was on the committee when we first started the merger of the Essex Tech and the Essex Agricultural School and the North Shore Vocational School. So just want to give you a little bit of perspective on a great man that lived in our times, and now he's gone, and we will appreciate him. Just for information, I have a clip that I've used in the past, but I did not include it this time. But our voices will change the world. And that's why I invited both of you. And the agenda and opinions are solely by the topics of the town host and commentators. So, first and foremost, what I'd like to do is introduce John Archer and Richard Trask, but first we'll go with John Archer. Can you give us a little bit of a background, who you are? I think everybody knows who you are, but what do you do?
Well, my name is John Archer, and I too echo those lovely comments, Mark, on Wayne. Wayne and I sat on the board of Salem State Board of Overseers, and we used to sit around and sort of wonder what they do. We didn't quite figure it out. We sort of laughed about it. I think we said, this is the board you get on once you retire.
Right.
And it was more for name only for that wonderful institution. But Wayne was spectacular. His love of Danvers is just, there's no one that holds that position except probably the man to my right, Richard Trask, my friend, my good friend. It's wonderful to have this type of personality that truly loves our town. And I think I disagreed with Wayne on a lot of things, but we always were friends, and he was always a gentleman. I think I'm a little more rambunctious, and I wasn't always, but he was always so nice and good and fair. maybe we disagreed, but I admired him greatly. And fiscally, I think he was the best in the state. I mean, that many years, almost 40 years to be with, the same job. Who can say that? Not many people. Anyway, my name is John, and I own an insurance agency in Beverly. I'm born in Beverly, though, however, the last 40 years I've lived here. And I straddle both city and town in many areas. I've been on many boards. My main board that I continue to be on now is River House Life Bridge and the Grace Center in Gloucester. It's the homeless board. Also the Visiting Nurse Association. We had lunch today. We were celebrating our wonderful gala we had at Danversport Yacht Club last month. So we made some money, which was the name of the game. I love Danvers. I've been here, and I have a wonderful relationship, I think, with a lot of people in town. And it's different than Beverly. Just as good, just as fine, a little different. And I have a big garden, and I work in my garden every morning. I'm a morning person, so I'm up at 5. And
I visit the rabbits in the morning.
Oh, that's what you do. Good, Mark. Good. And but it's a great town to live in. I'm delighted I ended up here, and I think I'll probably really end up here.
Well,
and it's been nothing but a joy and quite a journey to
well,
be part.
one of the things that I put down on our outline here is Danvers lifetime resident, and that's not totally true, but you are a long-term resident.
Long-term.
And you're a businessman and historical preservationist, because that's one of the things that sort of gets you going with the preservation, which is similar to what Mr. Trask does in his own way. And you are a philanthropist, and that's what I think a lot of people in town recognize you for. So what we're going to do is move it over to Mr. Trask and see what kind of a introduction you can make.
Yeah, great. Well, hi folks. Pleasure to be here with my friends. I want to mention a couple things about Wayne as well. Wayne served under the wing of former town manager Bob Curtis for a number of years and learned the ropes of Danvers. I don't believe Bob was a native, but Wayne was. They graduated from Danvers High School a few years earlier than I was, so I always thought him as a kid more than my contemporary. I believe he was appointed town manager at age 24. And I can remember being at a pancake festival that we always have in March. And it was just shortly after Wayne had been appointed. And I don't think people were really too sure to have somebody so young to be the town manager. And I can recall seeing him, and he was pretty much by himself. And I thought, that's pretty tough. So I went over and talked to him for a minute, and that was the last time Wayne was ever by himself. Right. Because of his demeanor, because of his gentlemanly character, and his being able to never fly off the handle, no matter if you were after him or not. And also a very good administrator. Like John, I had some differences with him. I figured, hey, he went to Salem State and he was a history major, so he should be all in favor of the things we want to do. And he was supportive, but not overly so. But I did, over the years, watch from afar the many improvements he made to the town. And more than just the improvements, the character he gave to our community. So our community, to many people outside of the area, was looked upon as a very stable, very business-like organization. And we did have our flaws, but Wayne did good service for so many years. And we've only had a few town managers, but I don't think any in the future will ever have the term of office that he had serving the people of the town. I am Dick Trask. I'm called a townie, although I'll confess to the millions who are watching tonight that I actually was born at Beverly Hospital. But as soon as I could, I crawled out and got to Danvers, and have been here ever since. And then in 1972, after a number of part-time jobs at our wonderful Peabody Institute Library, I was appointed town archivist. And we are now celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. And someone who, in one of the press releases back in '72, said, some young kid is taking care of all these old documents. Well, I've evolved, and now I'm a dirty old man who can hardly get around, but I still love my job most of the time. And I love the town, and I committed myself many, many years ago to try to serve where I could in the little niche that I can. And I take the Archival Center as an important function of our community. It's one of the few archives that's as unique as it is, in that we have all of the library records, all of the town records, all of the church records, with the exception of the Catholic Church, about 40 different organizations in one location that everyone can be able to visit and use. And as I get older, I kind of think that I'm kind of like the keeper of the dead, the people who lived here from the 17th century and the Aborigines who lived earlier, down to the present time. And many of them are lost to history. And I feel like I keep at least some of them alive, and we can hear their concerns, their daily lives, their pedestrian things they did, as well as the fantastic things that happened in Danvers that relate to the history of the United States. And for that, when I'm feeling down at the archives and going, "Cripe sakes, I can't do all of this stuff and get it all in order," I think of the bigger picture, and it makes me smile.
Well, one of the things that I put down on your Danvers lifetime resident, and again, we go into Beverly, just like John, but you're a lifetime resident and you have ties to Danvers for a long time, but your primary objective is historical preservationist and historian. Basically, that's your primary job. But one of the things that I noted in your information on Google is Danvers, Massachusetts Town Archivist Richard Trask honored to have his name attached to the Danvers Archival Center. So you are named forever in the little niche that you have down in the library. And that is a pleasure to go to, because it's so well organized. But one of the things that when I spoke to you in regard to the show, I said, we don't want to get into the prehistoric history. We want to get into the 25, 30 year, what has happened since 2000, or, sometimes around there. So thank you very much for, coming to share your thoughts. So what I also had planned, and I am sorry that she could not make it tonight, is Eileen Harris, who is also a Danvers resident. She's a businesswoman and concerned taxpayer and invested resident. And she was not able to make it tonight because of her health issue that she has with her She had a tooth pulled the other day, so she is swollen. But now, just to complete the Wayne Marquis scenario, I think we're all in the same situation where, as selectmen back in '95 to 2001, Wayne and I had our differences, just like everybody else. But one thing that I'll give, and I'll share this with everybody, is that I appreciate what he was able to do at that time, because we don't have that type of leadership at this moment. So what I wanted to express is that Wayne would listen for hours. We used to sit in his office for 3 hours at a time after, and we discussed things, and he was very receptive in learning things, but also he imposed his view of what the town should be, and he always cared about the town. So what I like to do is next is that we have some special topics that happened over the last 25, 30 years, maybe even further, is that John has expressed an interest in what has happened to Danvers State Hospital, the closure and associated results to our communities. And you were also involved during the closure of that hospital, as well as I was. But John, would you like to just start on your special topic?
Well, it's a huge topic, and it took years. I think it was like 5 years of my life, actually, that we opposed the demolition of the Kirkbride building. Basically, what we were doing, we knew it was going to get developed. We knew all along it was going to get developed, but the Kirkbride was a 19th century granite and brick masterpiece, never to be rebuilt. It was the most expensive building ever built in the Commonwealth up to the 1870s. And I like to say how it achieved great success during its early days.
Right.
It was in our days, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, with the overcrowding and the staffing and the funding, eroded Dr. Thomas Kirkbride's 19th century vision. But it achieved great success in its early days. And I like to emphasize that. And I've met many workers that worked there, and they loved working there. You have to love the population. Now, the population were called lunatics at the time. We call them developmentally delayed, and there's so many levels of, which we called at one point mental retardation, and so many levels of it. Unfortunately, when they closed Danvers State Hospital, Dukakis's administration and Reagan in the national arena, a lot of those people just went out in the street and died. And the idea of group homes, which was going to be what was going to happen, is a lovely idea. And there's some very successful group homes. I know of some, but economically it's not very feasible, and they generally have a very hard time of working. Danvers State was a hospital. I got very involved with a homeless shelter in Beverly. I'm the founder of River House. We have a 38-bed license, and we're at capacity. We merged with LifeBridge in Salem, and recently took over, a couple of years ago now, the Grace Center in Gloucester. So I've been dealing with homeless issues. We had a Zoom meeting yesterday, a lot. And Jason Etheridge, our CEO down there, and I have come up with the percentage of 80% of our population suffer from some sort of mental illness. Now, there's many different types of mental illness, as I said. It's really very, very difficult. But when they left Danvers State Hospital population go, they went somewhere, and if they didn't die, they are in our homeless shelters.
Right.
Again, 80% of our people would have been up at Danvers State Hospital. Last week I met with our sheriff of Essex County, Kevin Coppinger, and he, I met him at the Middleton jail, and he agrees that a big percentage of his population, and the stat is 40% of his population, suffer from mental illness. And I said, well, Kevin, do you know what that means? That means that 40% of your population in the Middleton jail are innocent. And he agrees. They certainly don't belong out on the streets, but they belong in a hospital receiving treatment. The 1870s, Dr. Thomas Kirkbride had a vision that really addressed that problem beautifully, better than what we're doing today. It never should have been closed, ever. It should have been brought to 21st century standards, and concepts were different now. And but I want to emphasize the great success that it did have before the overcrowding, understaffing, underfunding.
Well, isn't it true that now our society is suffering as a result of what happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when Dukakis and federal government shut down the facilities?
Of course, absolutely. It doesn't take any rocket scientist to realize that this population needs to be addressed, and it's a difficult population. There's some people that just thrive in administration of that population and love the population, and they're just wonderful people out there. But it has to be rethought of, or we'll look at the situation with the guns and the hideous shootings. That the mental illness that is there. We talk about it, but is enough being done? Well, Department of Mental Health, we have a good Department of Mental Health here in Massachusetts, and a lot of the politicians think, well, we give money to DMH and that sort of solves the problem. The reality is, no, it doesn't at all. They don't get enough money, and we don't get any money from Department of Mental Health. We have to rely on fundraisers. There's no third-party reimbursement for us at the shelters, and we now have day centers that we run. We have one in Salem that we started called the Grace Center at Salem, and we have the Grace Center in Gloucester, which we provide meals and showers and computer and socialization and haircuts. But we need to address this in a much greater way. It should be paramount on every political agenda today. It's as big as anything I can think of.
Well, at the time when we were negotiating the reuse of that property, I believe that there were some very serious issues that were uncovered as a result of a graveyard on top of that hill, and the building was unsafe, but they were able to save portions of it.
Oh, cool. Well, we knew the interior. That was a bunch of baloney. We knew the interior of the building. It's pretty much a brand new building up there, even though a third of it was saved. Richard called it taxidermy. I remember your word. And but we did save a third of it, and it houses approximately 60 apartments, I believe.
Right.
And they were the first apartments to be sold. Did you know that?
Yeah.
They were the first. We were told that they wanted to tear it down because no one wanted to live in a former mental institution, and that just was not true. A lot of the things that Avalon Bay was saying, and there was nothing wrong with Avalon Bay. They never did a redo, but we made them do it. Kathy Morano was chairman of the Preservation Commission, and we worked for 5 years. Right. When the request for proposal came out, one of the paragraphs was to house a certain percentage of mentally and disturbed or mentally challenged individuals. And I remember Avalon Bay, and I think, Richard, you were at that meeting when they came to us, and they said, well, we'd like to take that paragraph out. And I was sitting, I remember, next to Kathy, and we'll give you $1 million. Yeah. And we went over to Kathy, and I said, is this a bribe?
Yeah.
Are we being bribed? And $1 million, I mean, you have to, well, God, that's a lot of money. it means that much to you. And so, I was looking at a sea of lawyers. They had, I think, 6 lawyers that day, and we had scraped together money for one
lawyer.
One lawyer that was going like, well, and one of the questions, one of the lawyers said, "How much are you paying your lawyer?" And I'm like, we raised like $1,500 for the entire thing, and their 6 lawyers were each getting $300 an hour, and they made it very. I mean, I'm thinking, well, I'm in some warped way enjoying this meeting very much, because this is like playing with the big boys. And we had I also remember that same meeting, they had a fellow come in, he said, "Well, I do reuse for the buildings at Avalon Bay." And I'm like, "Wow, do you remember that?" And I remember I said, "Well, I didn't think you did any reuse. How long have you been working for them?" And he goes, "A day."
Yeah.
And we're like, "Oh gosh, this is getting really interesting."
Well, there was a lot of negotiations at that time.
Negotiations. We were calling them bribes. But
Well, there were
negotiations.
negotiations, and I think we finally we negotiated a baseball or softball field at the bottom of the hill,
Yeah.
which was then sort of sold back to them because they wanted that property for the frontage.
Yeah.
And there was some commitments that were made. But what I saw from the reuse is basically became another establishment where people were housed in their apartments instead of the Kirkbride building.
Mm-hmm.
So the Hospital Hill has become a very desirable place to live.
Oh, it's beautiful, beautiful land. And as Kirkbride himself, chose the land, and part of his 19th century design was to be on a hill in rural America with great views, great air. It was truly a town within a town.
Right.
It was high on Hawthorne Hill. And the
Hawthorne
views
Hill.
stretched from the surrounding hills and countryside all the way to Boston in the ocean. It truly was a testament to the human condition, no less formidable than the Hermitage or Buckingham Palace. It was that beautiful.
Yeah.
But
Let me give a little historic perspective
There
on
you
it.
go.
I lived on Lindell Hill, and every day I walked out of the front door, I saw the Danvers State Hospital in the distance. That big tower was an ever-present view. I died at Danvers State Hospital. Danvers State Hospital was built in 1874 to 1878, and as John said, it was the most expensive up to that time project the Commonwealth ever had. They knew that they had a population in northern Essex County that really needed some assistance, so it was built. And Kirkbride was a philosopher who basically said that what patients need is a lot of good air, freedom, being able to be with themselves, and that they would be able to be treated in a humane way. Dorothea Dix had visited Danvers back in the 1845s and had gone to our poorhouse and wrote a pamphlet that she sent to the Massachusetts legislature of how terribly people were treated who were insane at that time. And that brought around a reformation of people who had those problems. Once built, the Kirkbride building, which if you walked it from one end to the other was a third of a mile long, right. Was done in Gothic revival, Danvers bricks, granite from Rockport, local builders. They had a board of trustees. The building was supposed to accommodate 500 people. It began growing very quickly. A nurses' school was built shortly thereafter, and by the 1960s, there were over 40 ancillary buildings on that property. Right. The philosophy changed over the years, and you can see how different ages tried to, in a good way, take care of the insane. the water treatment, electric shock, lobotomies at one time, cold water immersion. And by the 1950s on, they thought the panacea for taking care of the insane was to give them pills. And by 1992, when the last patient left there, they had no safety net. And that's one of the major problems we've had with the insane. Is they did close everything too fast. The Danvers property was probably the best of about 50 different insane asylums throughout the United States. And the architecture was absolutely fantastic. In 1961, I participated in a civil defense program down at the Riverside School, in which Thurl Brown, who's the CD director, and a whole bunch of organizations, including the fire department, police department, and whatever, portrayed a disaster, and did that legitimately so that they could see what they needed and where. Many of my classmates, including I, got involved in that, and a lot of them had really neat, terrible scars and blood coming out every place. My thing, the tag said I had collapsed lungs, and I couldn't have any of this neat stuff. So they eventually found me, and I was transported by ambulance from Danversport up to the Danvers State Hospital. And in one of the Kirkbride rooms, it might have been the autopsy room for all I know, the doctor said he wasn't treated fast enough, he's dead. So I died at the state hospital. Around 1985, a woman by the name of Sini was doing a research paper, Masha, yep, on state hospital properties. And she came to the archives, and I started assisting her in it, and we were able to get the entire campus, 40-plus structures, almost 200 acres of land, put on the National Register, which meant that this was a nationally significant complex. Yeah. By the 1990s, we started hearing all the things they wanted to do with it, that the patients had been swept out, and now the Commonwealth owned it and was trying to figure what they would do. We thought that National Register designation would be helpful. It was not helpful at all. And I'll say this publicly, the Massachusetts Historical Commission at that time, I started learning what state politics is really like, because they were told by the powers that be that they weren't supposed to interfere with it. They're supposed to be the people who help and keep historic structures going. And they were told if they wanted to keep their budget, don't interfere.
Stay out of the way.
So National Register designation was flown aside. And John, Wayne Eisenhower, Kathy Morano, and I were basically think of neat things that can be done, because this had been done in other places in which they kept the old building. They made them quirky apartments, which were picked up so quickly. Through a number of problems and faults, the water was left on in the Kirkbride for 6 months, and many of the floors pancaked. But the structure itself was still physically secure. And it was really a sad time. It was the first time in my life, I've had minor, defeats and so forth, but as a kid up until then, when I wanted to do a historic project and got my friends involved and had some enthusiasm, we usually were able to do something. This was the first major, absolutely major defeat, because bigger powers that be were involved in it.
Well, the keeper of the keys was Bill Galvin,
Yep.
Secretary of State. Ironically, I met Bill for the first time 2 days ago. He was at Joan Lovely's event in Peabody, and I brought it up.
A real hack.
Exactly. Well, he and
We met with his office.
Yeah.
And
well,
the
to my knowledge, he never went to that building. I don't think he ever went in the building, and he was the keeper of the. It was ultimately him.
Yeah.
Department of Capital Asset Management.
Right.
I remember Mary Beth Clancy and.
Well,
some of them-
there's also the agricultural land that's associated
Yeah.
with that hill,
Yeah.
and that's been hopefully preserved for a while.
Yeah.
at least.
for a while. Well, also, it's a very interesting thing to note that Thomas Kirkbride's the integration of people, just regular people, to go up to visit if they weren't visiting someone that was living there, was the beautiful gardens. And if you look at the pictures of some of the gardens, and being a gardener, I'm aware of this. You look at, they were like Versailles type
Yeah.
gardens. They were spectacular gardens. So people went up in their buggies in the 19th century to view these, and they were tended by the patients.
And
Well-
in the 19th century, there wasn't any stigma against what was known as the insane asylum. And actually, you look at Danvers Mirror articles in the 1880s and 1890s, and they say, please don't come up and visit the gardens on weekdays. Only come on weekends because you agitate the patients that are up there. That changed significantly so that when I was a kid, that was known as the Nut House.
Nut House, yeah.
And the thing that really ruined the whole concept of taking care well of the mentally ill was the overcrowding. Originally meant for 500 patients, by the 1960s, there were almost in excess of 2,000 patients up there. And I can remember that a lot of my school chums would get part-time jobs up there. These are, juniors and seniors in high school, and they would be made wardens up there. And the things they would tell me about the conditions and so forth. So it was a wonderful, very good ideal that a lot of people tried to do well, which just by the overburden of so many patients and a change in the staff.
And the introduction of drug therapy.
Absolutely, yeah.
The introduction of drug therapy in the 50s. There were no drugs up to the 1850s. And in the introduction of drug therapy, and they were all experimental, it made that the patients became very violent, and thus the attendants had to be a lot stronger than they were. So it caused a whole nother personality.
So there were unintended consequences of their solution that
Yeah.
Dukakis and everybody else wanted to
There's a wonderful
solve
book. It's called Light in the Asylum. It's the story of Thomas Story Kirkbride. And reading the book, it's like a futuristic way of treating, this is 1870s and before even, a futuristic way of treating mentally challenged individuals. It's brilliant, and you think, this is the 1870s. I think we've certainly gone ahead in many, many ways, but the history of psychiatry, which is
evolving
fascinating.
forever.
It all happened up at Danvers State Hospital. The cold water immersions, electroshock therapies, the lobotomies, and they were all done to help the patient. Like I'm sure someday in our lifetime, Mark, we might hear they gave Grammy chemo what?
Yeah. And I get about 10% of the people who contact the archives do so because of the Danvers State Hospital. And every year now, a new book comes out on it. I just picked up a color book which shows the place as it was falling apart, and it's very eerie and so forth. John and I and a group visited there to look at the conditions at one point, and boy, that was interesting. I made sure I brought 2 flashlights because all of the windows had been boarded up, and when you went in, it was perfectly dark. And if you're walking down the corridor and want to see what's in this room, If you don't have a flashlight, you just suddenly notice that it's 3 stories down. But the place that was most eerie to me wasn't the Kirkbride building. It was the Bonner building, which was built in the 1950s. And it looked like, you know, you were going to see a ghost coming
Well, that's
down.
like an operating room, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Because I remember back in
It was
the
a
90s.
hospital. It was a hospital.
Early, yes. And early when they announced that the building was condemned and there was water damage, as an engineer, I said, I'm going up there. I get up there. I went through the whole building, Kirkbride building and the Bonner building. But they didn't like that idea.
Yeah.
But it was still structurally sound, the
Yep.
exterior.
Not only was it structurally sound, when they closed it, they just shut the door and walked out. It was never mothballed.
Right.
And it was, I think, Richard, you and I are the ones that walked through that last walk. We were walking sometimes through patient records that were
Yes.
2 feet, you know, it had been vandalized, and everything was there. Everything was there.
And you know what I have? I know you have a number of artifacts
Yeah.
from there. The kids who used to go up there surreptitiously had more sense of history than the adults did. For about a year after, I would get a kid, a 14, 15-year-old kid, come in with a pile of papers saying, these were on the ground and we didn't know, we thought they should be saved. I also got pieces of furniture and the newel post for the administrative building that kids brought in, as well as 100 1878 plans, not of the Kirkbride itself, but of the ancillary buildings.
Yeah.
And
Well-
just a final thought from me, if people are interested in seeing what it looked like and a little bit of history on it, please go to my Archival Center website. You get it through the Peabody Institute Library, click on Archives, and I've got a few rants about what happened there, and some material and a whole bunch of pictures. And the final thing that I want to mention is that one of the agreements that Avalon made with the town was for a memorial up there. And that was in 2005. And it wasn't until 2017 that we finally started doing something about it. Someone had made a beautiful patio overlooking the far end of the Drumlin Hill that it's on, with these very large pedestals with granite markers on it, which didn't have anything on it. And we looked at this, it was done ass backwards. It was done by having the materials, but not what was going on it. And so I have to give credit to Kathy Simon and myself, and at the time the planning board assistant
Susan Flaherty.
Fletcher.
Fletcher.
Kathy said, we got to finish this. So we took it on as a project. Susan looked at all the old records, found out that they was responsible for it, got $10,000 from the old and the new owner. I came up with an idea of having flat anodized sheets that could include text and photographs framed, and we put that up. Prior to then, I always make commitments that when somebody does something bad in town, I just won't go there anymore. And I hadn't been there except for this project. And I must say it turned out pretty good. And it was dedicated, I think, 2019. And if you can go up there, theoretically they're supposed to maintain it. I brought my daughter up to see it about 6 months ago, and it was still in good shape.
Yeah.
And I think we have basically the history of the building, the history of the architecture and a history of the people. And it includes a lot of very nice photographs and text.
There used to be a chapel with a steeple on it.
Yeah.
and
There were a
that-
couple. There was a couple
Yeah,
chapels. There
there
was a
were
Catholic
It's
chapel.
a Catholic one, which was the biggest with the
Right.
steeple, yeah.
So
that was-
those are gone now.
What they saved was part of a horse barn, part of the original well pump, and that's about all.
Well, you know what? This has been a recollection of what's happened in the last 25, 30
Yeah.
years, and you two brought the history right out to the table. And what we need to do is follow up on some of it, and maybe we'll do a visit up there and just, show the audience of what is actually up there.
Mhm.
So, I really appreciate both of you in this particular topic, but what I would like to do is, the question that I raised in here is, what is the most significant event that affected your life during the last 25 years? Most significant. And I'll start with Mr. Trask, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
because that is, history is important in this town.
Well, for me, the most significant thing that happened was the death of my wife.
Right.
9:12 p.m. on May 20th, 2019. She passed away after what was a successful heart operation. And we were a good team, and she was always given short shrift because I always was in the papers and so forth, but she is so responsible for 60 or 70% of any success I've had in my life, and she was much smarter than I was, a real helpmate. We had our arguments, and I look at my life now kind of as a novel, and great beginning, wonderful middle, and then an end, and then I'm now in what would be considered the afterward of the novel. I function still, I have friends, I see people, I do my job, but it's not quite the same.
Right.
And a little personal, but I do thank her for all of the stuff she did. We had a book business, Yeoman Press, and we published 3 books, and I couldn't have done anything without her on that. So that's the most significant thing for me personally. As for the town is changing, as is America. And we were talking before we went on the air tonight about how people are much more insulated now. And once COVID came, that even made it more so. I can remember up until the 90s or whatever, there were huge numbers of civic organizations in town. People would have no problem eating supper and then at 7:30 going to 1 or 2 of their civic groups. That doesn't happen anymore. We sit in front of our media system. The kids and the adults are on their phones, and we get less connected with how we were in the past. I also bemoan very much the demise of newspapers, especially in Danvers. I used to like the Danvers Herald. I used to like Myrna's column and all of the little things about the Cub Scouts meeting here and there, and even the Salem News, which is a shadow of what it was.
Right.
I'm not one who goes on Facebook or those kind of things, because I find that even that, when you're not in connection with people, you can get nasty. And a lot of crap happens on Facebook and other things like that. So,
It's called social media,
yeah.
and it's not very social
Yeah.
in many cases. John, how about you?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this question, and like Ethel, I thought of a friend of mine. His name was Gilly Vaz. He was killed in a car accident. We were best friends. And he was killed in Danvers. It was over 10 years ago now. And I actually became a cemetery person, which is sort of an odd thing because we weren't a cemetery family growing up. But I, for a number of years, went to the cemetery almost every day. He's buried at St. Mary's Annunciation in Danvers, in a very sort of gentle, quiet space, and I found great solace going there. So that's probably about the most significant. I also like to think that it hasn't happened yet. I deal in insurance, which is the potential loss. Potential is very real to me. So I think I'm just starting out. I'm excited about everything, and I think the best is yet to happen. The best is yet to come. I know that sounds a little Pollyanna, but I've enjoyed, one of the things I work with on a daily basis is the Danvers Art Association.
Right.
And you know, we saved a lovely building, a historic building. The same fellow, Lester Cooch, who designed the Peabody Institute Library, our gorgeous building, and one of them in Danvers, also designed was the Williams School. And we have a great membership, and we're busy all the time. Our membership, unfortunately, is down because of COVID. Not that people died, we had a few deaths. It's that people got out of the rhythm of attending those type of fraternal organizations. So it makes me sad that people have not re-upped.
It's the social contact that has to
Well, I agree.
reconvene.
I think Netflix has done nobody any favors. Right. They're all clever. I'm the first to admit how clever and how hooked you can get on all of them. When COVID first started, I was sort of the go-to person. I could tell you what happened in absolutely and I was embarrassed. That it was like, 9 in the morning, I was watching these heavy-duty sort of things, and I'm like, what am I doing? So I shut them off, and I never put them back on. And I'm afraid people have still caught up in that. We need more members at the Danvers Art Association. We teach adults that have never drawn before to draw, and it's just a glorious time of my life.
And that goes back to historical preservation as well, because you were instrumental in saving that building. That's where historical meets, social meetings.
Well, I was purely involved with the architecture of that building. I didn't even know there was a Danvers Art Association. I've now been president for 20 years, and I think it's an annuity. I think I'm president until I die. I think that's the thing. I remember walking into that building with Wayne Marquis, and we had somehow gotten keys before and went in and cleaned it up because the heat wasn't on for 11 years.
Right.
And there were flocks of birds living in it. I mean, it was really, and I went in with my ladies, and the town had voted to tear it down 3-2.
Yep.
No, I think it was 4-1. We ended up rescinding the vote. They had never rescinded a vote, but I brought my membership of mostly little old ladies that we went to the selectmen's meeting. We weren't on the agenda, but like 50 people walked in, and they were a lot of them were retired teachers that went and said, "I had you in the 4th grade."
In that school.
In that school. So anyway, we saved it, and we won 3-2.
Yep.
It was
Now, this is an example of how people can get involved in preserving history and the architecture that we work on. So what I like to do is move on to another subject, which I'm not going to go into a lot of. I have material in here for 3 hours, but I don't think we're going to get to it. But what I'd like to do is, Richard, you have some historical information in regards to the 250-year anniversary of Danvers itself, and that was back in 2002. And you also mentioned other anniversaries, and I'd like maybe you can speak to that, because I think it's important, because what I noticed in my search of information, historical information, I saw ceremonial sealing of the Danvers 250th anniversary time capsule. So there is a time capsule buried someplace.
Yep,
And
almost in front of the Rotary Pavilion on the grounds of the Peabody Institute Library. That was done in 2003. People in town were invited to put something in, not too big, that related to their lives or the town of Danvers and so forth. Time capsules were very stylish at that time. And when the library was redone, we found the time capsule from 1892, which we had no idea where it was. Workmen found it when they were doing repairs to one side of the library. And I was thinking, oh boy, all sorts of neat stuff. And
Not a safe or anything.
it was in a lead box, which had pierced, so water had gotten in it. And these people in 1892 had no foresight. What they did was they did annual reports for the town of Danvers, which I have 20 of in the back room of the archives. News clippings, a penny, a 3-cent piece, and a quarter. I mean, they could at least put a couple silver dollars in there. And it was really not very thoughtful.
They were very frugal at that
They
time,
certainly
as they
were.
are right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So the-
what do we have in this capsule now?
There's all manner of. The capsule is actually about. I think it was about 5 feet long. It looked like a torpedo more than anything else, and it said that this would last for 500, 1,000 years or whatever. And some people brought little Beanie Baby kind of things, and I wrote up my experiences. Very boring for a week, where I got my coffee that morning and I put 2 sugars in it and that sort of thing. There's a wonderful time capsule that the city of Peabody has, that once in a while the Peabody Historical Society writes about it. And they've got stuff with people imagining what it was going to be like in 1976 or whatever. And it's just absolutely fascinating. There were many other projects. That was one of my periods of having some heart problems, so I wasn't involved as much as I wanted to. We had a big parade. Town meeting had some special activities. I gave a centennial speech at the Peabody Institute Library. A booklet was published on it. I'm going too far back now, but to me, the 2 celebrations that I thought we did the cat's meow on was 1992, the 300th anniversary of the witchcraft events. Right. And I had been planning that for 10 years prior. And we had the most exciting, vast program that got national exposure, even though we were in competition with Salem. We did a wonderful memorial, which is still on Hobart Street, just across the street from where many of the people accused of witchcraft had their examinations. We had 5 different programs at different parts of town. The first one was at the First Church on March 16, 1992, which was the first day of the accusations of the witches. We had almost 4,000 people at St. Richard's Church, which was the site of where the afflicted children said witches' Sabbats were taking place. We had that in September. It was the longest program. It went for 3 hours. I loved it. Kathy Morano did some readings. We also, for that celebration, and I call it a celebration, not just a commemoration, we decided that it was important to remember those people who had, when society had failed them, when their church had failed them, when their government had failed them, average people, 19 of them, stood up to all powers, including sometimes their own families, and said, "Damn it, I'm not a witch, do with me what you want." My favorite epitaph, we call it an epitaph, was when George Jacobs, a resident of Danvers Port, was examined. He knew what was happening, and he knew this was kind of a kangaroo event. And he said, "Well, burn me or hang me, but I'll stand in the truth of Christ. I know nothing of witchcraft." And what we did was we celebrated the individual who can stand up to all manner of difficulties, whereas 50 people confessed, believing that their lives were very important. Whereas these people knew that if they continued not confessing, they were going to be hanged. So we also broadened it to talk about, and we have had different programs that talked about the Japanese-American experience in World War II, the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s, black riots in New York in the 1840s. And we tried to bring it in to show that witch hunts are not things of the past. They happen today. And that we must have clear vision and bravery to be able to understand what is truth and what is right. And we thought that these people from the past, who in the 1950s I wasn't even supposed to talk about, in Danvers you didn't mention witchcraft then. By 1992 we wanted to celebrate them, and we had a real bang-up program.
John, what have you got about witchcraft?
Well, I was just thinking about when you brought up Ethel. I went to a wonderful breakfast that Ethel had at your house, Richard, for I have a very good friend in Joan Kennedy. And we had Joan, Ethel, and you hosted Joan and myself, and Joan's sister, Candy, and Bob, her brother-in-law. And she was in Richard's house. We had a lovely breakfast that Ethel put on. And Richard, a lot of people don't realize it, is an expert on the Kennedy assassination. And Joan just looked around your house, and we were in the library area, and she said, "John, why does Richard have so many books on the Kennedy assassination?" And I said, "Well, he's actually," I think we even talked about this a little bit before.
Yeah.
That we might ask.
I had actually put some of the things away so she wouldn't necessarily see them.
See them. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, she asked me, and then Joan proceeded to tell a story that to this date is yet published, and gave us her own of the day that JFK in 1963 that he died, and what actually she did, and what Ted did, and what Bobby did, and the actual goings, which I never heard. It was Joan and Ted's 5th wedding anniversary, the day that JFK was murdered. And they were planning a big celebration. And they were expecting Jackie and Jack to come to the party. They were living in Virginia. And they had done their Washington deal, and they were going to come home that night and celebrate with his brother. And so they, the murder happened, and Joan said that they all, she canceled the party, and she said everybody came to the house anyway. And do you remember the funny story about the candy? She said that this package arrived, and they were worried because there was a idea that they were going to be killing Kennedys. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And so the Secret Service took this box out that was delivered to Joan's house, and she said that she didn't, they didn't know what to do. And Ted got in the car and he drove to Hyannis to be with his parents. And they brought the box way out in the backyard and somehow opened it up, and it was a huge box of chocolates Joan had bought for the party, So.
Yeah.
But it was just fascinating.
Yeah. I'll always be grateful to you for those. We actually spent 2 days together.
Yeah.
And to speak to someone who remembers being at the West Virginia primary and how she was getting a little more attention than the candidate was, so he had her go someplace else. It was just absolutely fascinating. Or to hear election night when all of the Kennedys got together, and there's a famous picture of all of them in Hyannisport, and she told us all this behind the scenes stuff. She was a delight, and also, which I really enjoyed, a bit of a flirt, which I thought was really nice.
Joe?
Yeah.
And she continues to be a good friend of mine. She's suffering from just getting older, like everybody.
Well,
but
you know what? This is another example of the history that has happened here in Danvers, and you both have participated somehow. The only thing I remember about your wife is when she was bringing lunch for you, and I was sitting there, and she brings lunch for him. I mean, what a guy.
It was a love affair. I always said it. It was. I think you were the most enviable fellow on the block there, Richard.
All right. One more item that I like to cover, and this is more recent. We have gone through in our town with 2.5 override proposals and the CPA proposals. CPA was meant for historical preservation and other factors, but we have not had the ability to pass the 2.5 overrides because people don't want it. We have been able to, like I said in Wayne's, obituary, is basically we've been able to get all of these buildings renovated, rebuilt, and new ones built in place within our budgets. So, my feeling. I'm a budget guy anyway, so I always fight that battle. But one of the things that really preserves historical preservation would have been the CPA, but the CPA was not accepted by the residents as well. So do you think that CPA is something that should be...
Danvers, we have so much inventory, and a lot of cities and towns, they have destroyed their historic building, so they don't have as much.
Right.
Danvers still has an awful lot, and I think by having so much, they don't appreciate it's just another building. We lose 5 or 6 beautiful historic buildings a year. Being on the Preservation Commission, and I think Richard and I share the same feeling, it's one of the most depressing organizations to belong to because we usually lose. We've had some successes over the years. In fact, last week I went to the Coverley Barn in Ipswich. We had a beautiful, by Sylvan Street Grill, a beautiful onion barn that was came to our purview to be torn down. Becky Kilborn owned it, and it didn't make any sense for her with her project. But we were able to get a company called Timber Framers that came and took it apart. It was pre-1850, so it was a more important barns after 1850 or one category, and pre is another. So this was pre-1850, I think it was 1840. And we were able to take it apart, and the Sisters of Notre Dame, where it went to, a pre-K program, raise the $40,000, I remember, for a foundation.
it, yeah.
And no, they moved it. They took it apart piece by piece. I housed it's a timber frame. It's a bunch of barn people in the country. They came from different parts all over the country to do this. And then literally a year later, they came together and put it back. We had a barn raising in Ipswich, and they put it back together again.
Well,
that's a success story.
The thing that I was getting at is we have this railroad station, and everybody was hoping that the CPA was going to pass. That wasn't going to fund it, I don't believe. But I know that you, Richard, as a town meeting member, you've been there forever and ever and ever, even proposed to fund portion of that, move or, restoration. And I know that I'm against the CPA. I've been very vocal about that. But I believe that that railroad station or other facilities can be saved with private funds or institutional funds.
Yeah, the fact of the matter for Danvers, and I'm being very frank now, is Danvers does not have a real tradition of preservation.
Right.
We have 300, 400, maybe 500 people in town who would call themselves preservationists or want to keep the best of the old. We don't have the tradition of a Concord, of a Salem, of a Lexington that really cherishes its history. It's always been a minority. The only reason we got the Danvers Archival Center, I believe, through town meeting was the success we had several years earlier with international media
Acclaim, yeah.
on the excavation of the Samuel Paris house. But it's always been difficult. The barn you mentioned, yeah, it was saved, but it's not in Danvers.
Right.
The small train byway station, it's just basically a shack, isn't in Danvers anymore. It's in Kennebunk at the Trolley Museum. The biggest and greatest house Danvers ever had, the Lindens, 1754, owned by interesting people, and the site of the last royal governor's home while he lived in Danvers, was moved in 1932 to Washington. There's another barn, the Pope Barn, which was located off of Old Center Street, is now in Wilmington. So a lot of the treasures we have are either torn down or moved someplace else by people who have more of an appreciation. CPA could not have made it that first time because people like you had signs saying it was going to affect the tax rate. And also, that was the year that Trump was elected. So you had a real different group of people who, many of whom tend to be against things, came out.
Well,
This
no,
last
they're
time-
conservative. That's the
Well, yeah,
word
there are
I'm getting on the
conservatives too, yeah.
street.
Danvers has always been a conservative
Yes.
community. And if you look around, Danvers is an island unto itself around a whole slew of communities that
Cities.
have CPA. No, Middleton just spent $75,000 on restoration of a property, Middleton, from that fund. All of the towns around us believe in it. They get a portion of the money back. Our take for it would be a good meal. That's
Right.
what it would cost a citizen of Danvers. This last time was a failure because I think it was less than 100. They didn't have enough time to gather the 1,000 signatures, and they were, I think, shy of about 100. It will pass, but it's going to be passed after a number of properties that could be saved because of it are gone. And the one thing, the elephant in the room is what John and I have been fighting for since 2004. the preservation of the Danvers Plains Railroad Station. And we had our final try at Danvers
I know.
town meeting. Everybody wanted to preserve it, but nobody wanted it. And don't ever talk about the unsacrability of parking spaces in Danvers. People will give their children for a parking space. And that in the Danvers State Hospital are the two biggest failures in my life. And I feel very bad for them because I know that would have been a signature building for the town of Danvers. And people would be looking at it and saying, we did that in town, and now it's going to be a pile of rubble.
That should be a visitor center right there at that parking lot. And the thing
And a way station for the rail trail.
Right.
I was hoping that maybe the Lees might be willing to give up the baggage station. They had to put that there, and since they want to get rid of, well, I don't know if they want to, but there's talk about the barber shop and sub shop being obliterated. Put them in something like that. Make it something that everybody in town can be proud of.
But you see, there's political resistance, and it's not public resistance, it's political resistance. And that's why, this all rolls into the historic preservation. John, you're a preservationist in your own right with your artifacts from the Danvers State Hospital and all that. That's a beautiful addition that you have.
They were tearing it down, so I was able to pick up some
Right.
architectural pieces and put it on my house, but it pales to what we lost. I mean,
Oh, I know.
we lost one of the most magnificent buildings perhaps in the country. The train station is, I'm just so sore about that, and I just need to get over it. We've had, we were this close. We had a building permit. We had raised money for the move. It was $35,000. We had, and my committee at that point bailed on me. So even within the ranks, there was problems, and I to this day, regret certain things, and I should have done this. There's still a slight chance of moving that building to another location, another town, and I've been
Who
looking
appreciates
at it.
history more than Danversites.
Yeah, and it's Wenham. I'll be right out there. Wenham Museum. And I met with Jimmy Townsend, who owns it, and I'm meeting with Kristen Zambell, Jim's daughter, who's head of the Peabody, of the Wenham Museum, and they need more space. And then we're trying to convince them that it fits. I did an architectural drawing on a piece of land that they own, which is close to the museum.
The Townsends have been so patient.
Yes, they have.
And it's unbelievably,
Yeah.
it's right there in their yard. And all it has to do is move up to the back of the bank here or the parking lot.
Yeah, but they renege. I mean, there was so many people involved, and a lot of those people.
We came close several times,
Yeah.
and nothing happened.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, this has been a venture into our history, and I didn't want to go as far back as Dick has gone, but it's all appropriate to make us realize. I think a lot of people tonight have learned some things about the history of Danvers and what has transpired on these two specific sites.
Well,
But-
history is prologue.
I know. But what I want to do is we have 10 minutes left, and I just want to give you an opportunity to summarize what your current impressions are of where we're going and how are we going to fit into the next 25 years, because that we're building the foundation, or we have built the foundation in the past, but now we need to go forward. But I also want to, wrap this thing up, is that we need to communicate and discuss these issues with our residents in our town to be able to get their feel back. So, John, what do you think?
What do we do? What do we do? Well, I mean, I'm very positive. I think that we've made some great strides in many avenues along the way in Danvers. I think we're a very inclusive town. I think that's to raise the gay flag and is shows that we're heading in the right direction. I think that we're very tolerant and loving towards perhaps those individuals that we don't walk in their shoes, but they are there. And I think that it's come right from the top down, and I'm very proud of Danvers, how inclusive they are. I think Sally Kearns has been just a wonderful, majorette, getting us, in front of people. Ted Spiliotis did a great job for all those years. So I really think that we have some really good people involved. Again, I'm very impressed with the sheriff of Essex County. And we're going to have some interesting people, on the bigger levels. So I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic. I think we should be very proud of our town.
What can we do to improve things right now? I mean, as you guys have gone through the last 50 years in history of Danvers. The one thing that I'm sort of concerned about is how is history, you learn by history, by reading and understanding what has happened in the past. How can we apply it?
Well, we need
now?
people to participate, and
there you go.
And I go to so many of my organizations, and I'm still involved with a bunch, and it's the same people, some of the same people in all the organizations. And it's the same people going like, well, where are the younger people? Where are they? And I think that we have to make it more engaging and realize that, we don't have to be in front of a screen, as I look at a screen right now. We don't have to be in front of a screen all the time, but it's fun to actually get out there and feel sort of like the human condition. And the human condition is, to me, is music, is painting, is drawing. I teach drawing, and I love to teach adults that never drawn before. I think we need to engage people. I need to do a better job in it, at it. Glen Magna is doing a show this summer, July 14th and 15th, and I'm involved. And we have a wonderful soprano singing. Her name is Kathy Lamy. Somebody out there remembers the Lamy family singers.
Yes.
Kathy played Guinevere when I played King Arthur at St. John's Prep 55 years ago, and we're reuniting after 55 years doing some of the same music. So it's fun to get involved. We have some wonderful bones out there to jump.
What's the, is it sponsored by the Historical
Danvers
Society?
Historical Society,
Right.
and it's, we did one last year, and it was for the Samuel McIntyre Tea House, and we raised some good monies
Right.
for that to help restore it. And the mansion, the beautiful mansion that exists beautifully still, but needs some updating naturally. Everything's like that always needs updating. So hopefully we'll raise the funds for that.
Good.
It's July 14th and 15th. You can get tickets by going on the website of Danvers Historical Society.
Either that or go and visit them. That's a good trip too.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
It is.
Yeah.
Mr. Trask, what do you say?
Well, as
You've been thinking.
as Charles Dickens wrote many years ago, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. In Danvers, life is always in flux. And we've had many bad things happen in Danvers, the witchcraft, the abolitionist movement, the original flu epidemic, but we've had wonderful things happen too. And it all comes down to the individual. And it's a matter of, today, too many people are self-possessed about what's best for them and don't care about their neighbor.
Self-centered.
Yeah, and I'm pleased that we are more inclusive. I've grown in inclusivity the past decade or so, and we just have to, remember the golden rule. Remember that we are a community which the early Puritans settled here, believing that we were an island upon a hill, and that we all have to help for the common good. We are a commonwealth. And whereas strife and storms happen all over the world, all over the country, I haven't really experienced in my life so much strife that's happening internationally and nationally. Right. And I bemoan what's happening in our country right now.
And it worries everybody.
But what we can do is celebrate ourselves as a community of people who want to do the right thing and be as inclusive as possible, and remember that everyone is a neighbor.
Right, and our town is changing all the time.
Yep.
So what I like to do now is I like to close, but we have 3 minutes. And like we started in the beginning is this segment 6 that I have on here, current discourse that's happening. We are, having a discourse right now. Open meetings availability. Remote meetings do not help to understand the process, because you don't get involved, you don't get your input in right away. Websites are not a source of the best information, it's the source of information, but it's only there by being placed by somebody from, whether it's the library, the town hall, or other agencies. We only get what the town hall or the schools want us to know on the websites. So by going to particular meetings, we can learn a lot more, and we have a better chance of communicating with our neighbors. So David, if you can just put I have a clip that I use at the closing of every meeting, and that's why I want to close with the website, is I fear the day that technology will surpass the human interaction. The world will have a generation of idiots. Mm-hmm. And Albert Einstein stated that many, many years ago, and I think it's so appropriate that we need to take heed of that and understand what is really happening. So, Mr. Trask and John, I call him John, so
you can call me Richard.
I do, I do, because I'm approaching both of your ages, so. So I want to thank you very much for participating. This was a very good discussion, and it gives us the perspective of what you have experienced over your years and how the history has evolved and how you participate in the development of your mission in homeless, and how that has approached our lives, because I know that I went down there one time serving food, and that was an experience in itself. So thank you very much for participating. And Richard, thank you very much too. John,
Thank
next
you.
time I will call on you guys again. because I think we need to get a little closer history of what's going on right now. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
Danvers.